Parents were too busy. Your teachers were too thick. People told you culture wasn't for you. But you're not stupid. You're just ignorant. Join us for some drinking and thinking about the best of 5,000 years of civilization. After all, it belongs to you.
Now, hang on. I should make a qualification here, because nearly everyone in my family is a teacher.
Well, my father was a teacher.
Yeah, it's incredible.
There's nothing wrong with teachers.
No, I mean, generally, it's individuals.
Okay.
It's the teaching profession where it was so thick, is it?
I mean, and actually thinking about it, I don't know about you, I had some inspirational teachers at school.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, maybe we're going too strong with your teachers were thick. Maybe the point is the curriculum, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I have lost track of how many people have said to me, if only I had been taught just the basics of, the great books, human culture, the range, how it all connects, civilization. Yeah. In order, see how it all connects together, what comes out of what. And these are just basics that you need to understand anything, but also to be able to enjoy your life and have a hinterland to retreat into when it all goes wrong, but also just because it's so enjoyable, for itself.
I couldn't agree more.
Although this point about preparing for exams, that's a lot of what teaching is now, and what a lot of students spend their time preparing for exams. My wife recently had that classic nightmare, like the exam nightmare, because she was nervous about something. She was like, turning up for her final exams, absolutely naked.
I thought you were going to say hadn't done any revision.
And hadn't done any revision.
Well, my point was going to be that was actually my life rather than my nightmare. Particularly when I took my first year exams at university.
Oh yeah, those are pretty catastrophic. And you almost got kicked out. You never did any work. I met you at uni, and you were famous for never having done any work, and you were in the third year by then.
I was.
Whereas I was so good at exams that my equivalent nightmare is that I turn up and I'm fully clothed, and it's a really easy exam. So I have on neither count do I have any opportunity to shine. Yeah, I mean, so I remember when we met at uni. Well, it was actually my wife that met you first, wasn't it? She was my girlfriend.
She came down.
You were throwing one of your parties,
and she came down to complain about the noise. Yeah, she lived above.
Turn that bloody noise down.
Yeah, I did invite her to the party.
You basically gave her a glass of champagne or something,
yeah.
and we never looked back. We've been friends ever since.
Pretty much so. Yeah. I mean, you didn't come up until the following year, and then I think you just sort of made an outrageous speech at a gathering once and appalled everyone.
Yeah, that's right.
I was having a birthday party the following day, my 21st birthday.
21 days for 21 years.
It was the first day of the 21 days of party.
That was a good party.
Yeah, I just thought you two might fit in.
I think there's also a problem, particularly in this country, I think. I was saying it took me bloody ages to get back from yours last week.
Yeah.
And I missed the last train, so I had to get a black taxi from Waterloo Station. And I had the most brilliant taxi driver. I love talking to cabbies. I think they get a terrible rap, but actually they're almost always really interesting and good fun to talk to. And it was one of those things that was late, and I was like, look at my phone, and I shut down the conversation, I can't read. But he kind of kept prodding me, and eventually I thought, fuck it, I'll talk to him. And I'm so pleased I did. So we were talking about what I've been doing, talking about the podcast, and he said, and he was a proper old Cockney cabbie, and he said, I'm going to butcher his accent now, but he was like, the writer that I really like is that Dickens, Charles Dickens, and the scene that always gets to me is that scene, is it Great Expectations, where the guy Pip, his dad turns up, and Pip's just really embarrassed about his old dad because he realises how his dad's not the guy he always thought he was, and he's just really embarrassed. And I used to think like that about my dad, and now my son's at uni, and maybe he thinks like that about me, and it really, I find that so emotional, that scene. And he just started going on about Dickens and how Dickens used to walk around London at night, and this guy works at night. When his cab's in the garage, he walks around London. So this is fantastic. Yeah. But the thing that really got to me was he said, "Well, of course, you might say that these books aren't really for the likes of me, and you will know much more about it." And I was thinking, no, what is wrong with our culture that is? Why did he feel embarrassed telling me that? He just told me this brilliant story about Dickens and how he was, Dickens would have been so pleased to know that 150 years later, people cab drivers walk the streets thinking about Dickens. So did he think he just thought, it's not for the right... I feel like we've let people like that down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had some work in the garden a few months ago. And
You've had work done on that garden?
Yeah, incredible, isn't it? I haven't done any work on the garden.
Clearly.
But I had 3 quotes, very sensible, always gave 3 quotes. One of them was really expensive. The other 2 were exactly the same, but I gave the job to the guy who, as he was leaving, he was passing through the living room, he was like, looked to the bookshelf. Which is your favourite novel by Gabriel Garcia Marquez? And we ended up having a cracking 45-minute conversation about it. We came to different conclusions.
Which one? What did he say?
He said Love in the Time Column.
Yeah, well, that's the right answer.
Well, it was a bold move, but I went for 100 Years of Solitude.
We need to work out which of those is going to appear on the podcast.
Well, I think I'm just giving you my opinion. But the point is, I mean, and this guy absolutely
shit
didn't have
gardener,
that view.
unfortunately.
Yeah, he was a great gardener as well. Like, you know, this.
Did you give it to the other guy because you'd given the wrong Gabriel?
No, I gave,
I
gave it to him because I wanted to continue to have really excellent conversations.
So where has this idea come from that culture doesn't belong to us? Sure, the whole point of it, that human culture belongs to all of us. So
I think it's a bit of a lack of aspiration, unfortunately, through the education system,
Definitely.
which is, you know, and again, fair play to them.
It's a combination of snobbery and inverse snobbery. It's a fatal combination.
Yeah, the worst combination. And to be fair to them, they might be doing it because they've got lots of other things that they have to do in the time.
Right.
But those things are the wrong things.
Yes, I think we're in violent.
Now we said that the teachers were too thick. You know, let's say polemically, rhetorically, but you said your parents were too busy. Now we're both parents.
Yes.
How do you find?
I'm definitely guilty of this. I am too busy. All of the things that I fantasized
Have your
about.
children read the Iliad yet? I mean, they're 6 now.
I have been telling them the story of Troy, as we call it, which is quite sweet. Oh, and my daughter, we've been doing like the Greek gods, which is obviously pertinent to this podcast. My daughter told her teacher at school something that my wife had said about him in her hearing, which is that he looks like a Greek god.
Wow.
And so that's going to make for an awkward parents' evening. I mean, he does, to be fair.
Is there any particular Greek god that he looked? One of the good ones.
Definitely one of the good ones.
Yeah.
Apollo, one of those ones. So that is going to be awkward. But yes. So,
why she ended up with you? Because you do not look like a Greek god.
Clearly she's not always thinking about me. She's thinking about
you look like something out of
teacher.
Chinese Buddhism. The great news is that culture does belong to you, and you can access it through all these great books because they're not expensive, and you can get them for free from the library. And most of the stuff we're going to look at today and in the subsequent weeks are available free online.
Libraries gave us power. You can do it for yourself, and actually, a lot of the greatest writers, thinkers did teach themselves.
Yeah.
So but even just as an ordinary person wanting to appreciate this stuff, even if your parents were too busy and your teachers were too lazy, you can still get it.
It's never too late.
It's never too late, and we're here to help you do it. So, a little bit of background to this podcast. We obviously recorded our pilot. We knew we were going to do a podcast about literature, and we ended up, I can't really remember why, we just decided to start with some futuristic dystopias. And then in each of these dystopias we realised that books had been banned, or in some cases burned. And I think this also gave us the idea, well, hang on, if civilization was destroyed and you could only save a certain number of books, we said 100, what would you save?
Yeah.
And that is what has given birth to this podcast.
What we've done, haven't we? We've tried to whittle down a competition.
Yeah, so we're doing a Battle of the Books, 100 episodes, Battle of the Books each time. We'll put up 2, maybe 3 books, have them fight against each other, choose hopefully one that will go through, and that will give us our list of the 100 greatest books that we will need to save.
Well, those 2 or 3 books are themed, aren't they? So
yes,
we're putting, like we did with our pilot, we're doing books from a similar time period or on a similar topic.
We've also cut out, as a rule, we're not going to cover works of science or religion, live religions, because we don't want to offend anyone. These are books that you want to read, so we're going to assume that scientific knowledge, religious knowledge is going to survive the destruction of civilization in this.
Euclid's Elements of Geometry, an important work, but perhaps not a page turner.
I wouldn't read it in bed.
No, and in terms of the live religion, that's a good point. I don't think we really want to do the episode, what's better, the New Testament or the Quran?
which are we going to consign to the flames?
So I think for obvious reasons, we've decided we won't go near books religious books which have current adherents.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. So
but the Greek myths,
happy days.
Happy days.
And the final part of the jigsaw is, of course, we are going to be pairing these books with a alcoholic match. So you heard about the sort of snobbish, what wine would you have with this food? Food wine pairings. I always thought that was a bit pretentious. Wine book pairings. Now you're talking. So we're going to have different sort of booze with each book.
Drinking and thinking.
Drinking and thinking. That's what we're all about.
Yeah.
What are we drinking today?
Good question. I don't know. India Pale Ale.
Excellent.
I'm a great fan. This one's a Beavertown. They've all got some rather jazzy cans and stuff. Although I'm not sure about them being served in 330ml cans, like as if it's a Coke. This, I mean, obviously it's just a way of charging more money, but I also don't think it's quite enough to have a proper session.
Fine. Yeah.
It's the end of civilization.
Well, it literally is the end of civilization.
But an India Pale Ale, which is a cracking thing.
And I am drinking a spicy, awesome Willy Warmer, a spiced porter. Yeah. I'm going to drink it from the bottle.
Well, we're both drinking.
In fact, we're drinking it from straws.
We're drinking from straws in honour of the one of the first books we're going to look at.
Yes, indeed. So where should we start?
Well, let's go for 5,000 years ago.
Okay, well, we said it in the pitch, didn't we? So yes, human writing has been around for about 5,000 years.
Well, how long have humans been around for?
Well, they're pushing it back all the time, aren't they? By finding older and older people.
Well, not older and older people. I mean, there are people getting older and older all the time. Yeah.
It seems to have been a big leap forward about
when there's
100,000.
language and things.
Language, right. Language and possibly fire.
Yeah.
Which, of course, biologists have now agreed was given to us by Prometheus.
Yes.
Basically just monkey men, though, aren't they?
Not 100. I don't think 100,000 years ago. They didn't live in caves.
They're having sex with Neanderthals.
Yeah. I mean, who
I
night out in
expired.
Coventry, intellectually, just as competent and capable as us, albeit that they knew less.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're no stupider, they're just less knowledgeable. And we think as you keep...
Not stupid, just ignorant.
Absolutely, and you've said that we keep pushing back in terms of archaeological discoveries when we think civilization. We used to think it was about 5,000-6,000 years ago.
Yeah.
We now think it's probably double that.
Yes.
But in terms of writing, we've got about 5,000 years worth.
Well, it's interesting what you said about pushing back the beginnings of it in terms of sort of settled culture even before writing. So you're referring, I think, to this new discovery at Göbekli Tepe. I hope I pronounced that right in Turkey.
I am. Yeah.
And I mean, this really made me think, because I've never been that interested in human prehistory, because of just, my prejudice, these are just monkey men, and what have they got to say to us? But I was amazed
did not
by
live
that
in
stuff.
caves.
Well, no, they didn't, and they seemed to live in what was effectively a sort of proto-settlement, just at the very beginnings of agriculture. But the thing that really struck me was the discovery that these boys and girls were brewing beer, and that might have been why they coalesced in this area to begin with, and that basically the beginnings of agriculture, it wasn't about let's use these grasses to make some bread. It was let's use these grasses to make some beer. There are certain activities that you definitely can't do sober.
Well,
like go to a party.
Yeah.
Sexual intercourse. If you're British.
Giving a speech.
Too embarrassing. Giving a speech. Doing a podcast.
Work.
Yeah. Basically most things, I'd say.
Going into the office. Yeah.
Getting out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, but instead of the bread theory, which kind of comes back from Victorian times, and more straight-laced, it now turns out that actually, what's very similar to making bread, has many of the same products and stages. Brewing beer. And actually, that is why human civilization began. They got together to brew beer, and fair play to them. You mentioned you weren't really interested in prehistory. It is worth pointing out, we think history began when writing began. It's the same thing, isn't it? So writing is this great opportunity of passing knowledge down, and it is a game changer, because if you think everything that you know, you can pass on to another person one-on-one.
Assuming they're listening.
Assuming you've got a podcast.
Yeah.
But actually, when you come to writing, you've got the ability, if people can read and write, to pass information down for the ages.
And they knew it.
And to thousands of people at once, theoretically.
And I read, just on the way down here, a brilliant quote from an ancient Egyptian text from almost 5,000 years ago that said, the function of writing is to speak to the future. Isn't that great? So they were already thinking in those terms.
Yeah, it's amazing. So we have writing from about 5,000 years ago, but actually, nearly everything only comes from only 2,500 years. We've got very few books from this early, just immediately post beer.
Just as they're sobering up and starting to write stuff down. Well, and there's a reason for that, which is that a lot of those early civilizations were completely destroyed, and we lost their books, in some cases for thousands of years. But the great news is that we have started to find them, and indeed in many cases started to decipher lost languages.
Although there are a few which remain impossible to decipher.
Ancient Indian civilization of Harappan, 5,000 years old, lots of writing, but we just can't read it. We don't know what it says.
Is it Linear B or Linear A? There's one of the.
Linear A we haven't done. I think Linear B turned out to be Greek, but unfortunately it was all tax records. Yeah. Nothing particularly interesting.
Yeah, they do start keeping tax records pretty early on, amazingly. But
bureaucracy.
Yeah, Linear A I think remains undeciphered.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
And there's a few other scripts which we just don't know what it says. We can tell it is a language. It's not just marks.
It might be true of some of the Mayan stuff as well. Yeah. I think we translated Hittite again. It was all tax records, but tax records of people with names that were the same as names of characters from the Iliad, from Homer's Iliad, which is amazing. Makes you think.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because quickly realised that writing was great. We used it to tell stories and to express myth and religion, and a lot of that we're going to talk about. Yeah. And history, absolutely. But a lot of it, right from the beginning, has been bureaucracy.
One of the things that is amazing in terms of lost literature is the lost literature of the ancient Middle East, Mesopotamia, which survived, but no one had realised it had survived because when the Assyrian civilization was destroyed, their libraries were burnt, but the books were written on clay, on mud. So they set hard, and we've got them. Yeah. And we've managed to decipher them. Because
most books are written on papyrus or that, and they just sort of decay and crumble away. But these ones, this really early ancient trove, because it was made on such a cumbersome, one imagines quite awkwardly non-portable thing.
Yes.
I mean, we talk about reading on a tablet. These were literally reading on a tablet.
That's true.
But they have come down to us in this incredible environment. We get a lot of stuff from the Fertile Crescent, the Middle East.
Yeah. Which we think is probably where writing first started. And we found it in quite a dramatic fashion. This was a Victorian Assyriologist, I suppose, archaeologist, Austin Layard, and his colleague Hormuzd Rassam, who was an Assyrian. He was a local Assyrian, but he'd studied at Oxford. There are still Assyrians, a small community, and indeed an expatriate community in the States, I think. And this man, Hormuzd Rassam, had married an English woman, and he even represented Britain on a diplomatic mission to Ethiopia, where unfortunately he was imprisoned, but he was rescued by a group of British soldiers. I think Flashman might have been on that expedition, by the way. Anyway, he and Layard set off overland to Sri Lanka. And when they got to Assyria, ancient Assyria, which was in the Middle East, they decided to dig up one of these tells, one of these big, basically mud hills that they had realised were the remains of ancient cities. And the one they dug up, or they dug up several of the old Assyrian capitals, Nineveh, which we know about from the Bible.
Yep.
And what did they find? They found the dead library of the king of the world. The emperor Ashurbanipal, who was the last great emperor of Assyria. He conquered Egypt as well, so he controlled the whole of the known world at the time, and he was a book lover. And indeed, he even it is thought that he may have attacked places deliberately to get the books out of those cities.
I mean, it is incredible, isn't it? Because we
got it. Quite good, quite strong on the old law and order, the Assyrians, if the Bible's anything to be believed. And indeed, according to themselves. I mean, I don't think we should get too excited about this guy.
They published a law code, didn't they, with a very strange injunction about what you should do to a pig in case it sexually assaults you. I remember because I had to study it at university.
You looked that bit up, obviously.
Well, it does leap out at one. That, and the fact that
they enjoyed...
Well, that's my defence. That and the fact that they enjoy drinking warm beer.
Warm beer?
Through straws.
I know, God, warm beer in that climate.
Yeah.
I mean, because we're drinking English beers here, which are designed to be drunk warm. This boy, Ashurbanipal, he's living quite a good life, right? He's got this great library, all of the collected works in the world, as he thinks it.
Well, knowledge is quite literally power here.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And he controls. He's the king of the world. There's a brilliant quote from Inscription that said this: "I am Ashurbanipal, king of the world, king of Assyria. I sought with diligent eyes the wisdom of the inscribed tablets, which amongst the kings who went before me, none those writings had sought. On tablets I wrote, I studied, I observed, and for the inspection of my people, within my palace I placed them." So it looks like he's got kind of like a library that people can come in and have a look at these tablets. He wasn't necessarily such a nice bloke, by the way. We've got a tendency to think of him as a sort of proto Englishman sitting there, in his study. But there is if you go to the British Museum, there's a statue of him sitting in a garden, drinking some warm beer. His wife's there, and his wife's first husband's head is hanging from the tree behind.
All's fair in love and war.
All's fair, yeah, absolutely. We had something else about Ashurbanipal, which is that, according to Arrian, which we'll come to in a later podcast, when Alexander the Great was marching through the area of Nineveh,
many
hundreds of years later, and these cities were so destroyed by the collapse of the Assyrian Empire that he didn't even realise that they were ruined cities. They turned into mountains of mud by this point. But on a cliff face, he saw an inscription, and he asked his local guide, "What's it say there?" And the guide said, it says, "Eat, drink, fuck. The rest is worth nothing."
I mean, I have a particular dislike of the recent fad in people's houses to write words on the wall, in the sort of calligraphy,
Right.
Where people write "eat" above, the kitchen, or "bathe" in their bathroom. I don't like it, but in particular, you have like "eat, pray, love," or "live, laugh, love." Okay, but I'd love to see one which said, "Eat, drink, fuck."
Yeah, why not? That's good.
Especially if it was written in Assyrian, or Julia Roberts in the sequel to her hit film, "Eat, drink, fuck: How to Do Mindfulness During the Destruction of Nineveh."
I would watch that.
I mean, I think it would be better than the original.
It wouldn't be hard, to be fair.
Yeah, but I think it could be. I mean, it'd be big budget.
I should hope so too. Well, so unfortunately there was a sequel, or a postscript, horrifically, to the digging up of.
Yeah, can we go and see this now? Where do we go to?
I'm afraid it's Mosul, modern Mosul, and those twatties from ISIS, when they captured the place, they deliberately blew up the remains of, which are still only partially excavated, of these cities.
So these things have survived for thousands upon years.
Yeah.
Such that they were written by Ashurbanipal, read by Alexander, then by your chap who was, going and excavating.
They are.
That's like three distinct huge periods of history.
Yeah.
And actually, the chaps from ISIS, who I think it's fair to say we're not fans of.
I mean, this has pushed me more into an anti-ISIS camp. I'd say that. I wasn't massively into them before, but this has really pissed me off.
Total destruction of places like Babylon, and of course the Talibs over in Taliban.
Yeah, blowing up the Buddha statues.
But
these guys
to
understand.
Destroy this stuff was just.
But it shows you that they do understand the power of culture. These guys, So, Ashurbanipal, he faces a complete destruction of his civilization. Basically, he's ruling with too firm a hand, you might say, and all his peoples rise up. Babylonians, the Medes, they all come in, they sack these cities, and they burn them to the ground. But, as a result, because this stuff was written on clay, it set hard and it survived, and it's now, a lot of it's in the British Museum, the rightful repository of all pillaged items.
We can look after it better there.
Absolutely. I mean,
now, are you going to tell me then that in this library were some of the books that we're going to look at today?
Indeed they were. So we thought, the stuff was translated, and it was not just tax records. Tantalisingly, we had the King List, so this is like the earliest work of history, I guess, goes back to like 3,000 years BC. We had the first work of literature, which we'll come to in a bit, and we had the first creation myth. And so these tablets, something that I sort of described in a Middle Eastern museum once memorably as mud things of antique period, turned out to be a lot more exciting than they were built. And,
so you say creation myth.
Yeah.
So we're talking about, this is an account of how the world was created.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that they're not meant to be scientific accounts. So I mean, we do struggle a little bit with this in the modern. Like people, it's just nonsense. It didn't happen like that. And actually, I don't think they were even attempting to give a scientific account of the creation of the world.
Well, that's interesting.
Well,
so you think they were deliberately metaphorical? Well, so the early kings, are deemed to have ruled for sort of hundreds or sometimes even thousands of years.
You even see this in the Bible, don't you? That people, have these hugely, long
Methuselah,
lives.
was it?
Yeah, and again,
he was great though. He invented the really big champagne bottles.
Oh.
Good lad.
But but again, we can struggle and go, well, that's just nonsense. It didn't really happen like that. Well, yeah, and tortoises and hares don't organise sporting events to test,
right.
personal prowess. I mean, there is such a thing as metaphor. We have a sort of arrogant assumption sometimes that the people who came before us were stupid and now we know better. But actually, I think. They understood sometimes they were talking metaphorically. They don't know. They weren't attempting to do science. They were attempting to explain the importance and significance of things.
Oh, well, and so that would make sense of why you quite often get the phenomenon that different gods are associated with different cities, and the victory of those gods it's almost like a political statement about the victory of those cities that the gods represent.
So gods become more important over time. Stories are retold, and gods who were like minor characters become major characters because that reflects the fact that city has become a more significant city in that time. Now, people might say, "Oh, well, hold on, that's not in the version of the story that I heard," but people knew they got the game.
They understood. Yeah. So it's interesting, but guess where? I mean, it must have blown the socks off the Victorians who translated this stuff when they saw it. Not just because of how interesting it is, and how old, but also because of what's in it. And what do we find in this as a character in these works?
I know. It's Noah. Noah from the Bible,
Yeah.
Now, even if you've not read the Bible, which, to be fair, nearly no one has...
You'll at least have seen the film with Russell Crowe. What the fuck is that, by the way?
It's one of the
genuine question.
Films ever made.
I don't understand why Russell Crowe is surrounded by these sort of... They're kind of like Transformers. They're kind of monstrous Transformers.
Rock, yeah.
Made of rocks.
That's not...
I don't remember that bit.
That's not in the text.
No.
There's an honourable tradition of biblical epics, many of which are great. Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur, and there's some great stuff. Jesus of Nazareth, Five Hankers Everelli, all good.
Right.
Yeah. However, what was it called? Noah? Is that the name?
I think it's called Noah.
That don't
watch it. Under any circumstances.
It's not even so bad as good.
No, it is though.
But yeah, Noah. So
what else do we know about Noah? Then?
Well,
I can't remember.
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to say. Is all of us, even if we're completely, unchurched, not Christian, have a sort of idea of, who Noah
built the ark.
He built
the animals came in 2 by 2.
Yeah, well, or 7 by 7 at certain points.
Oh,
actually, so there's like 2 versions of the story which seem to have been mashed together. But anyway,
presumably prokaryotes were in there, but you'd only need one of them because they can bud, can't they?
Yeah, and presumably you didn't do them alphabetically because otherwise anteaters come immediately behind ants. We still have ants. So
that's true.
Yeah.
Everyone would have had to wait for the art box, wouldn't they?
Yep. And but yeah, so the idea is that Noah is told that the world is going to be destroyed by a flood because mankind's wicked. He's told to gather together like a small number of animals, 2 or 7 pairs, or in total. It's a little bit vague.
No brontosauruses made it onto the ark.
None. Yeah, the dinosaurs were just too big. But anyway,
okay,
they're all...
That makes sense, right.
Well, think about it, how else, otherwise we'd store a dinosaur. Think about it. So they're all caught together, and then it rains for 40 days and for 40 nights, and then they sort of chill out for about 150 days, and they come to rest on Mount Ararat.
Right, which is in the Middle East, isn't it?
Turkey, yeah. When they come to rest on Mount Ararat, the animals will release. They go out, and they sort of the 3 kids and their wives get down to it in designated areas to repopulate the earth. Okay. But they do still pop in and see their old man, and indeed popping in and seeing their old man is the cause of.
In all his glory.
Yeah. So it turns out that Noah, having done a good job in saving all life that currently exists, but God's let him off about the
dinosaurs. Yeah. Try harder.
But he decides to celebrate, and he gets some warm beer and a straw, and he cracks on. Now,
say what you like about Noah. He was a big drinker.
Well, his drinking actually caused a bit of a problem.
He was a problem drinker.
Yeah, he was. And at one point, one of his sons realises that he's essentially, passed out or in a state of, and goes in and decides to cover him up with a blanket.
Right.
Yeah, because he's in an undignified situation.
He's balls out and all guns blazing.
He's stripped. Yeah, I mean.
It's interesting. I did that on the coach once back from uni.
Yeah.
And I took off all my clothes, and I went to the loo. I took all my clothes.
You always take off all your clothes when you go to the loo. It's one of the weird things about you.
Is that weird?
I don't think most people get completely naked every time they wish to go to the loo.
Why would you keep your clothes on? It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, so I took my clothes off, but I got a bit confused, and so I came back out into the coach, but without my clothes, and I walked along the length of apparently, I don't really remember that, but I walked along the length of the coach back to my seat before I realised there's something wrong here. I had to go back and get them.
Well, that would have been very embarrassing, and Noah also found the situation
It happened to me in Rothenburg as well, in Rothenburg ob der Tauber, which is a beautiful town in Germany, on my stag do, funnily enough, and apparently I was found wearing nothing but a black bin bag covered in rubbish I'd obviously taken out of a bin to hide my shame, clutching a large stuffed badger. No one knows why, or where I'd got this from, what happened to my clothes. It's
we should
mystery.
Record this on a
we are recording
it, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, I think we've all perhaps got so drunk that we've ended up naked. If not, why not? But anyway, Noah certainly did, and that was very embarrassing to him. He was very keen not to be seen by anyone. You might think, therefore,
he's something to be embarrassed about.
Well,
we goes back to the naked
history doesn't record. But
well, it does. It's on the Sistine Chapel ceiling.
But you do wonder whether
he had a shriveled old todger. That was his problem. He was just deeply ashamed. So he punished the son.
The son's trying to do the right thing.
Right.
Going, I bet my dad won't like to see anyone looking at a shriveled old todger, and he covers him up. But because, in order for him to cover up, that son must have seen a shriveled old todger. He's cursed.
He's cursed.
Yeah, he's cursed.
That is a bad result.
Yeah.
Have you ever had to cover up your father's nakedness? Have your sons ever had to cover up yours?
I don't think either of those things.
No. Your mother's? Yes, Noah.
It's not called Noah, though.
He's not.
We know he is Noah because the things which we've just been describing, essentially...
The same, basically he goes through the same... It's the same character, different name.
It's a guy who creates
Utnapishtim, I think it is.
Utnapishtim, and he's a guy who essentially has created an ark to save all the different species of animal from a flood which will, cover the world.
Yeah.
And then you go, well, now, I suppose you could argue it's not Noah, and that just happened twice. But it's clearly meant, the point is that the character in mythology...
Not again.
This was the one thing we didn't want to happen. Yeah. But clearly, the same mythological character and the idea of the flood
Yeah.
It appears in the Assyrian literature and one later in the Hebrew literature.
Yeah, so this is quite a challenge to the Victorians, I think it's safe to say.
I think this was as much of a challenge as the theory of evolution was. Because the theory of evolution wasn't that much of a problem. It was for a few people. But a lot of people just understood that, we're now learning more about how God has created the world. I mean, Darwin himself had studied theology at university. There were evolutionists before Darwin. His own grandfather was
apparently he was a monkey.
Yeah. So you won't make a monkey out of me. No, so I don't think evolution was a problem to some, but actually for a lot of it, more sort of intellectual Christians wasn't a problem. But this was, because this challenged the idea of the historical accuracy of the Bible. Finding the dead library of the king of the world was a bit of a game changer.
So go on, tell us about this creation myth, because you studied this, didn't you?
Yeah.
And you know a bit about it.
So at university I did a module on ancient Near Eastern texts, and really cool.
So you did it? Did you actually do any work during this period?
Well, I remember this.
Okay, right.
So the version of the text we have actually comes from the Babylonians.
Mm-hmm.
It's written in a language called Akkadian, and it's called the Enuma Elish.
Okay.
But it's sometimes just referred to as the Babylonian Creation Epic. But Enuma Elish comes from its opening words, when on high. I think it's when on high the world had not yet been created, when on low the heavens had not been formed, or something like that. And essentially it describes the primordial sea. Here we find a bit of an echo to Genesis.
On the face of the deep.
The face of the deep. In fact, the word deep in Akkadian is tehom, which seems... Sorry, the word tehom is the Hebrew word for deep, and that seems to come from Tiamat. That is one of the characters that we meet in the... So again, you might go, this is just a copy and paste job. Well, it's certainly the case that the people who were writing the Genesis story had in mind the Babylonian creation. Sure. They were familiar with it. There's an argument, in fact, that they were writing essentially a riposte to it, a counter to it. They were taking a story that everyone was familiar with and putting their own...
that's not how it happened. It happened like this.
Yeah, they're putting their own monotheistic spin on it, because obviously the Akkadians, and the Assyrians and the Babylonians are all polytheists. They believe in lots of gods, and the Hebrews have this thing going on where they only believe in one god.
And most of the Egyptians.
And most of the Egyptians. In fact, nearly every culture, monotheism is an incredibly unusual position. Right. It's just we're used to it because it kind of won.
It won.
Won in the history of ideas. But anyway, so we have a version of the creation of the world where there are salt water and fresh water mingling together as a single sea, a primordial sea. They then separate it into two parts from that union, because they are both seas but also gods. They sort of have sort of a personalities and they can take on a sort of a human form, I would imagine. So they bring forward there's two gods, Apsu and Tiamat. Apsu's the bloke, Tiamat's the woman. They get down with it and they bring forward children and indeed grandchildren in good turn. The story is quite good. It's not very long. A few bits of it are missing, but from what we can translate, it seems to be that the young gods, the sort of third generation, the grandchildren, are pretty raucous. They enjoy a bit of partying, warm beer and straws. Essentially, they cause so much noise.
But where are they partying? I thought this was interesting. I think they're partying in the womb of their grandmother, aren't they, technically?
Well, all things are contained within them. Anyway, but they are having these raucous parties, and what it's doing is it's keeping up the divine grandparents, Apsu and Tiamat. So Apsu, the granddad, goes down and tells them that they need to calm down these young gods. They're getting out of control.
Turn that bloody noise down.
Exactly that. And they do what you would normally do in this situation if someone comes around to especially if it's a granddad. They kill him.
Well, they should have given him a glass of fizz. That's what you did.
Well, it worked with your wife, yeah. Instead they kill him.
Gosh.
And this causes Tiamat, who's the single remaining original god.
Pissed off, I'm guessing?
Bit pissed off, yeah. So she decides to launch a war against the young gods, and essentially it's like a civil war, and they split into parts. So some of the gods form, go, oh, I'm really sorry, we shouldn't have done that, and other ones go, no, this is our chance, who cares what old Tiamat says? So essentially there are two factions.
She makes some monsters, doesn't she, as well?
Well, she does engage with strategic deployment of monsters, which is a sound military tactic.
Absolutely.
The gods who are essentially the rebelling gods, they're led by, their champion is picked, and that is Marduk.
Oh, yeah. And he's the god of the city of Babylon, isn't he?
He later becomes the god of the city of Babylon. And in fact, like we were saying before, it's probable that in earlier versions of this story there might have been a different champion.
I see, right.
But now that Babylon is
City of Ur
taken over, yeah, exactly. The god of Ur would have probably been, or Nineveh or something like that.
But it's interesting that it specifically says that they chose Marduk because they were pissed. They'd had so much of this warm beer, which I'm starting to feel as well. That's why they chose him.
Well, Marduk has two good assets, which commend him, and they're sort of brought to attention to the extent that you think that perhaps that's not true of them all. So Marduk is known as the double-headed, so he's got two heads.
Helpful.
Like
Zaphod Beeble Rocks.
In the TV adaptation, not the film.
Oh, well, let's not talk about the film. Yeah.
And he also has two members, two penises.
Two penises?
Two penises, yeah. So he's known as Marduk the double-headed and double-penis.
Double-headed in both senses?
Yeah, I mean, so...
And where are these penises?
Well, again, no inscriptions have come down to us, no engravings. One assumes it's just a positive comment of his virility, because actually, I think that logistically... Well, I mean, you're going to have to use different trouser legs, aren't you?
Quite useful. You could dress both right and left.
Yeah, your tailor's going to have to take that into account.
Do they both go off at once?
One doesn't know. I mean, can you go to the loo whilst using it for other purposes?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Yeah.
Are they linked into the same system?
Yeah.
How does the plumbing work?
How many balls has he got?
4? I think 3. I think one on each side with shared one in the middle. Yeah.
Oh, weird.
But again, I'm just speculating here.
You are.
Any Assyriologist, no, please write in. So they fight.
The Klingons have 2 cocks as well.
They do in the more recent TV versions.
In the X-rated ones. How do we even know that? How does that come up in the...
There's a scene of one of them urinating against a wall. And they got...
And against another wall behind him.
Well, the thing is, it's clearly not the case in previous versions of it, because you saw it would have been mentioned in... Yeah, it would have come up if Worf had 2. We went out of Deanna Troi for a while.
Do the girly Klingons have 2 vaginas?
Well, again, depends.
Did the goddesses have 2 vaginas?
We just don't know.
You don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Well, this just shows us how much has been lost from ancient civilization. But we're lucky to just know what we do know. So the civil war continues, and as you say, Tiamat deploys monsters, but there is fighting on both sides, including strategic deployment of wind.
Ah, yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah, so essentially the 7 winds are brought in and deployed to military use.
Okay, right. So go on, how does this work?
Well, essentially, Marduk fires wind into his grandmother's mouth.
Right. Okay.
Which she does not like.
No.
And if anyone's ever tried this at home, I can confirm that my dear departed grandmother did not enjoy it either.
And, no.
May she rest in peace.
Yeah, indeed. And, it doesn't go well for Tiamat after this, does it? She really suffers from this wind.
Yeah, I mean, the wind, essentially, is...
She needs to take some Rennies, basically, in large quantities.
The wind into the mouth gives the opportunity for some, strategic manoeuvring, and essentially...
Fatal wind.
Marduk slays his grandmother, the war is over...
Well, she bursts, doesn't she? Because she's got so much wind, and that kind of creates the world.
Well, she's burst and then sliced. And then he uses her body, the carcass, because...
As you do.
As to date the world. Her bones essentially form the construction. And it is worth pointing out that at this point she's basically taken the form of a sea monster herself. The reason I mention that is we go back to that thing about the echoes with the Bible and Tehom, this word that we find in darkness was upon the face of the deep, from the opening lines of Genesis. Well, Tiamat, where we think that echo is coming from, the words have a similar root. The point is when God in the Bible creates the world, the story just has a sea with nothing in it. So it's the point. It's kind of like a one-upmanship going.
Like, no, you got that bit wrong. This is how it really was.
Our God didn't need to fight anything to make the world. There's nothing but Him, and He just brings it into being. So actually, there were, as you say, really problematic for a lot of Christians when they read this and go, "Oh my goodness, this is really challenging our belief." But for other people, they thought, well, actually, this gives us more information about how the early Israelites, the Hebrews, saw their religion. So it was a massively important find.
My daughter had terrible wind when she was a baby, and I used to have to do a lot of
burping. Were you pushing wind into her mouth?
I wasn't. No. Well, presumably inadvertently while we were feeding her, but she was. It was awful. And I once took her to a parent and child screening of Rogue One.
Yeah.
Probably the greatest Star Wars film.
Certainly the greatest of the Disney era.
Yeah, and I was really enjoying it, and she was squiffling, and I put her on. I was trying to burp her. And suddenly there was a sort of what can only be described as an absolutely explosive burp over my shoulder.
A thunderclap.
A thunderclap burp, a wet burp, I think you could safely say. And the lady sitting in the row behind me was completely covered in vomit.
Yeah.
It was quite awkward, really. I didn't know what to say at that point. I mean, I wasn't going to get up and leave because it was Rogue One. I wasn't. You know, this is,
the lady, did she miss the scene with Vader coming down the corridor as a result? Because I heard her apology.
She left. Well, I mean, okay. If you are listening to this podcast, I am deeply sorry, but it wasn't really my fault, and I hope you can see that.
Yeah, but you didn't use your daughter's body to then create any sort of world.
No, I didn't. Have you ever had a party in your grandma's womb? I had a similar situation once. This was quite recently, where there was some partying going on inside me, which I was not happy about. Right. So I took my kids to a children's party, and there was some pizza, and we were all eating this pizza, and it had been made by the kid whose party it was. Okay, made this pizza.
You ate kid-made pizza.
I ate kid-made pizza.
That was your first mistake.
Well, and it was
your children are young.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not
we can replace them, but you can't replace me.
My daughter does some great baking, but she's older.
God, and this thing. So we all got worms.
Wow.
We got worms. It's so disgusting. I can't describe the feeling
You've
of creatures inside you. And do you know how they breed? They basically pop. They lay their eggs in your bum, and then they pop out to say hello. It's really disgusting, wiggling around. It's really quite uncomfortable, but also oddly pleasurable, which makes it worse.
That is more revolting than the Enuma Elish.
It's more revolting than the Enuma Elish.
And you didn't even create the word as a result of it.
But so it gets worse. So I thought, oh God, I think I can feel these bloody worms. I'll go and have a look. This is quite difficult to look on there, right?
You need a complex series of mirrors.
Well, I squatted over my iPad, right, and did that thing of putting on the camera.
Not how I would have done it.
Right, and put the camera on reverse, like for selfie.
But you were secretly recording.
I managed to take a photo by accident. I must have pressed it with my toe or something. Anyway, my mother-in-law is looking with my daughter at the family photos, and suddenly I see from across the room, what the hell is that? It's a photo of me, very clearly me. You see my face, red face, looking down. You've got my balls there, and my cock, obviously, and my hairy ass.
Yeah, nothing you've not seen before.
Worms coming out. You know,
yeah.
I would say it's not my best angle.
Yeah, I'm imagining Medusa, the hair. You know, dive
across the room and grapple the iPad out of my mother-in-law's hands, and as literally my daughter say, "What is that, Daddy?" Fucking hell. But of course, the worst thing is that is presumably that was in the cloud, and the Chinese government could presumably see that photo. I have a horrible feeling that photo's going to come back to haunt me at some point.
I think it's going to haunt me. I've not seen it. Just the idea of it.
Horrific. It wasn't good. How did we get onto this?
I have no idea. But the point is, Marduk. Yeah, right. So after he's finished creating the world, he then builds Babylon.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. Greatest of all cities.
Absolutely.
And they think, and the gods go and sort of, hanging around, and they go, well, hold on. We don't want to do any work. We want to just carry on partying. This whole military operation has been about,
keep the party going. Right.
So who's going to do all the work in the world? So they go, you know what? We will create human beings, and human beings can serve us and do all the work and offer sacrifice to us, and then we give us food and drink, and we won't have to do anything. And that is how humans came to be. So in this story, we learn how the world came to be. And why humans and why Babylon's so important, because it's Marduk City.
So
it's simultaneously a political story.
Yes.
It's a sort of like a just so story, like how the camel got to. They're called aetiological stories, stories which explain the origin of
where something's come from.
But they're not meant to be realistic accounts, but they explain the significance of the origin of things, because that's like the salt water and the
that's so interesting. So
there's a lot going on. It's not very long. You can read it quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean it's you could read it in 20 minutes. I'd say.
Of course.
And I I recommend you do so. The interesting about Marduk, he was taken prisoner. So my understanding is they believe that the god lived in the statue of the god.
Yeah.
And the Hittites rock up in Babylon about 1500 BC, I think, capture the place, take Marduk back to their capital, to Hattusis.
Bad day when someone steals your god.
Absolutely bad day. And the Babylonians basically have to go and get him back. And I read a brilliant theory from Martin West, who of course we met because I invited him to that society, that drinking society. Wasn't officially a drinking society, but that's basically what it was at uni. And I remember drunkenly giving away the whole plot of the whole sort of thesis that he was about to talk about when I introduced him.
This is a long room.
Yeah, that's right, in the long room. And but he's got this brilliant theory that Helen of Troy was actually a goddess that was captured by the Trojans, and that's why it was so important to go and get her back.
Whenever anyone asks me about that, I always pass that off as, oh yeah. I mean, I think most scholars now believe that. I mean, it actually has become a more popular.
Yeah. Now, so Martin West, another great thing, he wrote a great book called East Coast of Helicon, or East Face of Helicon, which is about the influence of the Enuma Elish and other Babylonian creation myths on not just on the Bible, but on Greek mythology. So I was originally thinking that I'd put forward Hesiod's Theogony, which is basically that's where we get the story of the Greek gods from. And it's the first time we get the sort of proper story of the Greek gods, and all the they have incestuous relations, and there are different generations of them. They chop each other's ghoulies off. It's very, very similar,
and it's an attempt to make sense, because probably belief in the Greek gods, these gods arose in different places at different times. Sure. They probably came from like Proto-Indo-European origin.
They might have had
but the idea of how they all link together, one way of linking together different cults is to imagine, well, they're brothers.
Yes, right, exactly.
Or they're the parents. And it sort of gives you a sort of hierarchy, and it puts order in what actually were originally probably different chaotic religious beliefs.
Yeah,
so that, and we get you're right, we get our knowledge of the Greek gods. Most of what, if you're listening to this, you sort of know about the Greek gods from school.
Right.
We've got my Osborne book of the Greek gods.
Hesiod. From Hesiod. But the reason that I haven't put Hesiod forward is because it is so, Martin West is right, it's so similar to the Enuma Elish. There's clearly a big debt. By the way, the Hesiod's got a new bit. So instead of having the humans being created to serve the gods, his equivalent is women are created basically to punish men.
You sort of get that in the Bible, don't you? That women screw up and men are blamed as well. You also get in Hesiod Pandora's box.
Yes.
And in the box,
it's full of all sorts of things.
Full of wind.
It's full of wind.
Yeah,
that's true. It's true.
Yeah, just like Tiamat was after Marduk was done with her.
Yeah, just like I am after drinking this beer through a straw.
So that's it.
That's it.
Well, that's an Enuma Elish, but I think the fact that we haven't included Hesiod goes to show how punishingly brutal that we have to be in this podcast.
Yes.
Even
I just don't think it's very good, the Hesiod Theogony. I think the Enuma Elish is a better read. I would honestly recommend, if you could only save one, I'd say save the Enuma Elish.
Well, that's a really good, an important point at this point in the podcast, because are we saying that these are the great books that you sort of need to have read in order to become knowledgeable? But when we're picking them, we're also commending people who actually go out and read them.
Yeah,
to say it's worthwhile.
It's definitely worthwhile.
You'll actually enjoy it, because you might think, oh, I should probably be like well read and I should read them, but it's going to be boring.
There's nothing boring about this. It's, you've got gods, killing each other and partying hard and fighting monsters and
great stuff.
It's great stuff. There's a brilliant bit I like where Marduk suckles on the tits of all the different goddesses and they fill him with awesomeness. I'd love to be filled with awesomeness. That sounds like a good deal.
From the teat of a goddess.
Well, absolutely.
Or several.
Were you breastfed?
Well, yes.
Jolly good. Did your mum fill you with awesomeness?
Were you not?
No. It's one of my great regrets in life.
Explains so much.
When skies above were not yet named, nor earth below pronounced by name, Apsu, the first one, their begetter, and maker Tiamat, who bore them all, had mixed their waters together, but had not formed pastures, nor discovered reed beds. When yet no gods were manifest, nor names pronounced, nor destinies decreed, then gods were born within them.
Now, I should say that although the first destruction of Nineveh happened a very long time ago, probably 26 centuries ago, well, definitely 26 centuries ago, we know when it happened.
Nineveh, where this
library of the King of the World was destroyed and therefore preserved. Some of the stories in this library were much, much older, including, as we've talked about Noah already. Noah features on the king list, which was also discovered in this library.
Not under this name, though.
No, he was Utnapishtim, or in Sumerian, I think it's Ziusudra, and he features as a king, an very early king, about 3000 BC. A few generations after that, we have another king featuring on the king list, who is the subject of our next book. So if you're putting forward the Enuma Elish as something that as a candidate to go through to the ultimate library of 100 greatest books, I am going to raise you the Epic of Gilgamesh. And this is something which is a work of literature, I think, is the only way to describe
I think
it.
it's arguably the earliest. I mean, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
We could say it's the first work of literature. We don't know. There may have been earlier
First
ones.
we've got, I
But
think.
it itself seems to have been so old and so venerated when it entered this library a long time ago.
Staggeringly old.
That this is this is possibly the first.
I mean, the amazing
written stuff.
I agree. And the amazing thing about this is it is set 2,000 years before the destruction of Nineveh. That's almost as long before the destruction of Nineveh as the destruction of Nineveh was before us. And it was first written down, the earliest versions of it that we have are only 500 years after it's set, so over 4,000 years old. So this is staggeringly old, but it speaks to us with a strikingly modern voice. And that's what's so tantalising about it.
This is a great read, and I will say I am putting forward the Enuma Elish because I think it's so significant, and because we're all familiar. Everyone listening would be familiar with the Genesis story, and so this is a sort of.
And it's the first story we have of where we come from, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But even I will accept that monsters and wind aside, it doesn't read like a modern book.
Right.
You are clearly reading an ancient text. Epic of Gilgamesh, though.
It's
Cracking story.
Absolutely.
Why hasn't Netflix made it into a series?
It's never been made into a film, though, as far as I'm aware, and it's crying out to be. And it's got really a main character who is a fully formed character, an interesting, individual that is
has
a
an
literal creation.
inner life.
But get this, he was also a real man. So we've found archaeological evidence that he was a real king in Uruk almost 5,000 years ago. Isn't that incredible? And we've also found some tantalising archaeological suggestions that there was a flood in Uruk, just before his time. Now, I should say that the literary context, if you like, of this epic, which we've got multiple versions of it, so it was clearly very popular in the ancient world. The best version that we have, which is the one from Ashurbanipal's library, was written down, and we know the name of the scribe who first wrote it down around 3,000 years ago, Sinleki Unini. And I think we need to raise a glass to him, because what a hero for putting this together. Cheers. Sinleki Unini, we salute you. The plot of Gilgamesh.
It's a series of vignettes, isn't it? There's clearly different chapters, but it begins with Gilgamesh, king in Uruk, and he's
He's a good king, you'd say?
well, he's a depressed king.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's described as rejoicing and despairing.
Yeah, there's an argument that perhaps this is like bipolar.
Right.
And your point that you made about this being a fully formed literary character. There are no fully formed characters in the Enuma Elish.
Right.
Then this person does this, and this person does this. What we know about Marduk is he has two cocks.
Right.
Yeah. This is a human who seems to be suffering with some sort of depression.
He's a complex character, isn't he?
Very much so. So he is a sexually expeditious, I think it's fair to say.
He's fucking so many women in Uruk that the people of Uruk, even though they know he's a good king, are basically complain to the gods and say, we can't have this.
It's fair to say that he believes that being a king comes with perks.
Yeah.
But he also knows it doesn't really make him happy.
He's not satisfied.
He's not satisfied. But he goes out and one day encounters a wild man.
Wild man.
A wild man.
Sort of agricultural societies thinking about people who are still hunter-gatherers.
Which again
Sort of
makes
noble
sense because you
savage
get that with Saul and Esau in the Bible.
Right.
Yeah,
Cain and Abel as well. Cain builds the first city, doesn't he? And
so you do get these things. So it is possible that that's an echo of it. But anyway, this chap, I think we disagree about how it's pronounced. I think he's called Enkidu.
I'd say Enkidu. I don't know. I mean, yeah.
Well, again,
Let's call the whole thing off.
Yeah. So, and they meet each other and they fight.
Yes. Well, they sort of wrestle, don't they?
Marvellous scene like in Women in Love.
Oh, yeah.
In front of the fireplace.
Two men, naked as the day they were born.
Yeah, great stuff, lovely stuff. So they have this epic fight. Again, a bit like, Jacob wrestling with the angel,
Right.
Again, sort of literary motifs.
Interesting, some readings of this, and indeed of the Jacob myth, is a sort of potentially a kind of homosexual relationship.
Yeah, you can see it.
Because he says he loves him like a woman, basically. He falls in love with him.
It is sometimes pointed to as the earliest sort of reference to homosexual relationship. It is certainly a bromance, I think we would say.
Definite
whether
bromance.
we can go more than that,
Sure.
it is difficult.
Well, to be fair, the way that Enkidu is tamed and stops being a wild man is quite interesting, and is definitely not homosexual. Because he's tamed by... Gilgamesh sends out a prostitute. Well, of course, they had temple prostitution in those cities, so there were quite a lot of it around. And Enkidu has it's the love of a bad woman. They have sex for a week,
Yeah.
and that turns him into a civilized chap. Oh, and he gets drunk. He gets drunk on beer as well.
Yeah.
So those two things, that is how you become civilized.
Beer and cultic sex.
Absolutely.
Basically sorted it out. And
Eat, drink, fuck.
Yeah. Whilst Gilgamesh is cracking on with the women of Uruk.
Yeah.
And thereafter, they are an unstoppable duo. They are best of buds.
Best buddies.
And
Bad boys forever.
It's like a sort of a buddy cop.
It's like you and me.
Yeah, exactly. And like you and me,
Without the naked wrestling.
They go out and they have adventures. But before this, Gilgamesh has an unpleasant encounter. Or potentially unpleasant encounter, because he is lucky enough to come across the goddess Ishtar herself.
Oh, yes.
Now, you mentioned cultic prostitution, and the cultic prostitutes are there in service of the goddess. Essentially, you go in, you pay some money, you have sex, and that's worship.
Sounds good to me.
I mean,
it's
the
not
Church
like
of England could learn. Oh, I don't know. Have you seen lots
you
of
say that to the
parishioners?
Archbishop?
Yeah, when I had dinner with him. But yeah,
Could you just bring back some cultic prostitution?
It's all like Mrs. Hubbard from Postman Pat. You don't want that. Anyway.
What are you saying about Mrs. Hubbard?
Yeah.
A good-looking lady in her time. Yeah, so she's a goddess of sex, basically.
She is, and she offers Gilgamesh, who she recognises as a fine lover, the opportunity to have sex with her herself. However,
it's a good deal.
It sounds like a good deal, and it will be a tremendous but short-lived pleasure, because those who accept the goddess's embrace do not survive.
Oh, really? So what? It's she fucks them to death, basically.
Yeah, basically. So it'd be a great way to go.
How does she? I mean, does she fuck them and then kill them, or she just fucks them until they are literally used up?
We don't know. How would she deal with Marduk's two penises?
Yeah, exactly. Because I think she went down. There's a different story, isn't there, where she goes down to hell and she has to go through the 7 gates of hell, and at each gate she has to take off another item of clothing until she's completely naked. But I mean, even the description of like what she's wearing, she's basically just wearing jewellery. She's not really wearing anything else, sort of nipple clamps and stuff.
Well, Anyway, she is not pleased that someone turned to that.
Be a good way to go, though, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah.
Fucked to death by a goddess of sex.
And presumably, most people accept that, but they...
Would you accept that?
I mean, it depends.
It depends.
It does depend.
Yeah.
But anyway, Gilgamesh doesn't. Because, he's getting a lot anyway. And
that's true.
Yeah, he does turn down, and she is not pleased about it. And because of that, she decides...
She is not a happy...
Well, she decides to
Happy girl.
and in echo with our earlier book, a strategic deployment of monsters.
Yes.
So she sends the Bull of Heaven.
Right.
That we don't know much about. Some sort of heavenly bull, one presumes. But it's a monster, and it's sent to terrorise Uruk. So Gilgamesh and Enkidu go out to fight it.
And she also threatens to bring a zombie army out of hell, doesn't she? I mean, she is a badass.
Well, yeah, you need to, have a backup plan, contingencies.
Right.
They go off to Lebanon to get the Cedars of Lebanon, which is
interesting.
still on the Lebanese flag.
Yeah, it's interesting, that. Yeah.
They fight
Humbaba.
Yeah.
Now, he's interesting because he's got some special powers, I think you could safely say.
Is he Divine Wind again?
No, they defeat him.
Divine
They defeat
Wind.
him with Divine Wind.
Yeah.
Amazing, really. Again, strategic deployment of wind. But that's good because they have to defeat him because he's basically got killer rays. As far as it's quite difficult. The translation's difficult, and they also. I mean, it is actually amazingly written.
You mean like Superman
coming out of his like if he looks at you, you die kind of thing.
A bit like Medusa.
A bit like Medusa. Yeah. But he also seems to be able to attack you with dreams and nightmares. And there's this amazing sort of description of how, as they approach the Forest of Cedars, they have these very vivid dreams and they get scared and then Enkidu wants to go back.
Dreams of the dead?
Yeah, and there are different versions, but there is one dream where, Enkidu, he goes to hell and he sort of comes back and explains what hell's like, and he talks about how...
It's not good.
It's not good, The dead, are lost in hell, eating clay, eating mud.
So, anyway, they
Out with the
do kill
wings.
him by that, but because this Humbaba is beloved of other gods, it's just the gods are unhappy and they send a disease and kill Enkidu in punishment. Harsh. Well, his best bud, Gilgamesh, is not too pleased.
No, he can't get over it, can he?
Well, no, and he actually seems to have some sort of
It's like a breakdown.
Yeah.
He won't bury Enkidu until a worm, cut like a maggot, drops out of his nose.
Holding him, isn't he? Yeah. So he's sure he's dead. So he decides this is a tremendous crushing blow for Gilgamesh. So he decides to go on a quest, as one sometimes does in these sort of moments of where your life reaches a fork in the road, and he decides to go and look for the secret of life.
Yeah, right.
Now, whether this is to try and bring back
him,
I was going to say, is it to bring back Enkidu, or is it just because he wants to find out whether there's any purpose in life?
Because he doesn't like the idea of his own mortality has been shown to him.
I think so. And he goes on a series of other quests and adventures. Goes for a tunnel to the end of the earth, and he encounters a strange entity called the Alewife, who might just be a woman, but is possibly a goddess.
It's like the... You've heard of the restaurant at the end of the universe. He goes to the end of the world, and there's a pub there, basically. Yeah. It's like she's basically a barmaid, a divine barmaid.
Well, yeah, probably.
Do you remember that barmaid you went out with in Brighton?
Yeah, I do. Yeah,
she was quite divine. I mean, you went out with her for a very short period of time, right? She was not impressed. I think we can safely say you didn't last the course.
So. He asks her what the purpose of life is, and she gives him the answer that to be happy with eating, drinking, fucking, and the morsel life which encompasses those things.
Yeah,
like
married. Right.
Yeah, exactly the same. And with Gilgamesh, he actually has lots of access to food, drink, and women. He's actually quite happy with that situation.
That's interesting. I mean, you could say that it's a bit like saying to someone who's depressed, cheer up, basically.
Sorry, your mate's dead.
Yeah, that's it.
Shit happens.
Yeah. Get over it.
So he does decide that he wants to... That isn't the end of his quest, is it? Because he goes on a final stage of it, which is where we get the Noah character, the Utnapishtim.
Yeah, and he's quite hard to fight. He has to kill monsters, all sorts of monsters, scorpions and lions and all sorts of stuff, doesn't he?
Yeah, this is a big, epic adventure.
And he has to punt across the ocean.
Well, we are fairly champion punters.
I certainly am.
Well, so punting, for those who for some reason are not sure, is being on a boat and pushing it along with a pole on the riverbed. Which
presumably is what must have happened in the estuary of the Tigris and Euphrates all those thousands of years ago.
Indeed. So it's not like gondolas, which you actually use you're using the pole to sort of like, as an oar. It does involve putting the bottom. So it's a long pole to punt across the ocean, one presumes.
Yeah, but it'd be quite a good technique.
Yeah.
I think you would struggle with this.
We have a long-standing disagreement about which of us is the best punter. You are...
Well, the answer is me.
You are just deluded.
You, me, Gilgamesh, I would still win.
Anyway, he reaches there, and at the other side of this ocean that he's managed to punt across with this massive pole, he encounters Utnapishtim.
Yeah, interestingly, on the island of Dilmun, which I think has been claimed to be Bahrain. Modern Bahrain.
Interesting.
No, I went to Bahrain once.
I've been to Bahrain.
Yeah, I was there for about an hour.
It's not where I
changed planes there.
No, I spent 5 weeks there, and this is not where I would settle if I was to live forever.
You're right. Something deeply disturbing that happened to me in Bahrain, which is I was queuing to change planes, and the guy behind me and his wife, and he was eating chewing gum, and then he sort of made this clicking sound, and his wife held her hand out, and he spat the gum into her hand.
That's pretty disgusting.
Oh, I thought it was marvellous. So I tried to persuade my wife, do the same thing, and she just wasn't having it.
Right. Well, Utnapishtim is also living there with his wife, who may or may not have been allowed to spit chewing gum into her hand.
Now, is he completely naked though? That's what I'm saying.
Where's the sun?
Yeah.
So many questions. Questions which will have to wait because
You desperately need this.
Yeah.
This beer, I'm telling you.
Yeah, it's just I think I'm not used to drinking beer.
Oh fuck. Sorry. Where were we?
Well, I think it's worth pointing out why has he gone to see Utnapishtim, and that is because Utnapishtim is to Gilgamesh himself a hugely ancient character, because the flood story
this is the deep past even for Gilgamesh.
Is already a myth by the time of Gilgamesh, and that's why Gilgamesh is looking for him. Like, that guy, who saved all the animals in the flood, and they did it. He's still living.
He's still going.
And if you go and find him, he can give you the secret of eternal life. This is the Alewife, the advice the Alewife gives him. As well as just actually, but don't bother.
Yeah, you don't need this.
But if you wanted to, the guy, and he's like, what? No, what the Utnapishtim Noah type character? He can't still be alive. Yeah, he's in Bahrain, mate. Just crack on, get a punt, 3 days work, and you'll be there. So he arrives, gets finds Utnapishtim spitting into his wife's hand. Says, come on then, I've travelled all this distance, my friend is dead, I've been on all these adventures and quests, I've been given some advice that I shouldn't really worry about, anything, and just eat, drink and fuck, but that's not enough for me.
Yeah.
What is the secret of life? And Utnapishtim says, well, I'll tell you, but there was one final challenge, because obviously I know, because I and my wife are still alive.
We're immortal.
Yeah, we're immortal. And the challenge is to remain awake for 3 days.
Yeah.
3 days straight. Now, I reckon this is eminently doable.
Compared to the stuff he's already had to do to get there. Right?
Yeah, he's fought the Bull of Heaven. He's
killed and Barber.
Yeah, he's turned down Ishtar, which must have been...
That's the hardest one of all.
Yeah. So, I mean, I remember once back at university, we decided to see if we could stay up for a week.
For a week?
Yeah.
The Momathon. The famous Momathon challenge.
And, I mean, I have to admit, we did start hallucinating at some point.
Before day 3.
Yeah, it was
quite unpleasant.
It was quite unpleasant. You think it's going to be easy.
It's a form of torture, isn't it?
Well, you tried to keep us all awake for your 30th birthday, but I think in the end I did have to...
You broke.
I broke, yeah.
I managed that, but 3 days is much harder than it sounds. And you start to hallucinate.
I went through a period once where I was working really hard at work and I was getting only like a couple of hours sleep a night, and that eventually it does break you. So, but I do think that for the secret of life, I could do 3 days, because I think
have a coffee or something.
I think they hadn't got coffee yet, but
true.
I think we made it to day 4 and a bit.
I'm not sure we did. Well, I think we had strategic because we were just watching telly, weren't we? And basically we were sort of ordering in pizzas and stuff.
There was pizzas. We went to the pub. That was when we were drinking.
Oh,
that was a bad idea. But anyway, Gilgamesh.
We failed, but not as bad as Gilgamesh fails big here.
He does feel big, and
he doesn't just go to sleep for a bit. He sleeps for 3 days.
Well, when you've got to catch up on your sleep, haven't you? It's like you had a hard week at work. You have a big line at the weekend.
He's a big sleeper.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's had a busy few.
He's had a tough time of it, hasn't he, poor chap?
He is. He fails. At that point, Utnapishtim says, "All right, you failed, but let me tell you a story." And the story he then tells is the story of the flood. And that's how we. This is the earliest text we have, much earlier than Genesis and the Bible. But it again was already known,
and was probably. I mean, we've got separate versions where it's just the flood story. It was probably kind of put into this Epic of Gilgamesh as a sort of separate.
A way of preserving the story, a way of bringing famous stories together. So, like the Gilgamesh story makes sense without him. He could end up with the alewife and go home.
Right.
Yeah, that would be a great cutting point. Yeah. In fact, the whole Pushkin bit actually seems like and then this other thing happened in order to piece together stories. But great that he did, because
he does. It does have a crucial bit, though, doesn't it? Where he says basically the whole point is that the death is like the lot of man. That's the purpose of him telling the story of the flood, isn't it?
Yeah, that's yes. But I would argue that
she's already said that
the story would make sense without it. So we're kind of here. We find that, and again, it's sort of like the Enuma Elish, where they're like, well, we've got this creation story, but we also want to have this story about how Babylon came to be. So they constantly rewriting their own myths and incorporating new bits to it and changing the nuances. And so it's a kind of creative engagement. He is told about, as a booby prize, he is told about a rejuvenating plant.
Okay.
That essentially, it's not clear, gives full immortality. It seems to be a bit like the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So
classic.
Which
is the best Indiana Jones film.
I mean, you're almost right. It's actually the worst Indiana Jones film, but it's still great. It is the worst of the 3 Indiana Jones films. It's not the worst of it. It's the best that they made, and we're glad that they stopped there and never made any more.
Yes, thank God they didn't go do anything stupid like
a 4 or 5.
No,
not seen the.
I never will. But the I mean, it's great that Indiana Jones, because I always think there is a problem with the writing of Indiana Jones, which is that he gets to the Holy Grail. Obviously, the spoiler alert. Yeah. He's got it full of water, and why doesn't he just down it? He should down it. Give Dr. Schneider, a pint of it as well, and then take it back to Sean Connery. Why doesn't he?
He does drink a little bit, doesn't he? He has,
but not enough to. I mean, I know he survived till Indiana Jones 5, but he's looking his age now.
He's also survived to be played by an older chap in the young Indiana Jones Chronicles.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think.
But he could.
Without going into the diverting the podcast back to Indiana Jones.
Fantastic.
I believe
she was a good one, Dr. Schneider.
I think
she was a keeper, potentially forever.
She was a Nazi.
Well,
but I think it is implied in that film.
You'd have that creepy old Crusader knight watching you, wouldn't you, if you were there with Dr. Schneider for the rest of the time?
Is that Julian Glover? No, Julian Glover's the other Nazi.
He's the other Nazi. Yeah.
Went to my school.
Did he?
Yeah. Anyway, I believe the film implies that you can only survive in the monster.
You'd have Dr. Schneider there, wouldn't you?
I get that, but I think that's the same situation for Gilgamesh. Like, he has this rejuvenating plant, which is
so if he scoffs it, he can't go back, you reckon?
Well, it's not clear, but it's clearly not...
So he's got to go back to literally the other side of the world. So why would you put it in your lunchbox? Just eat some of it.
Yeah,
For God's sake, man.
Yeah, so he does get this rejuvenating plant, which... it doesn't seem to be true immortality, but it's a pretty good thing.
Okay.
But rather than scoff it, like you say, he makes the Jones mistake.
Yeah.
And puts it in his lunchbox take back. And when he gets back...
It's gobbled up by a snake or something.
Yeah. And again, snake, Genesis,
yes,
possibility.
Yeah, interesting.
Interesting. Could just be, I mean, you just get snakes in the Middle East, so not everything has to be...
Snakes play a big part in the Mahabharata as well.
Yeah, so I think, it's interesting.
So there it is. I mean, what a story. It's very moving. It is...
It's a proper...
It's a proper book.
It's a proper book, a proper story with ups and downs, characters you care about, plot.
Yeah.
Like, in a way that Enuma Elish doesn't necessarily have a plot, as a sequence.
It's got character development.
Yeah.
And it asks big questions and the questions of life. And it was written on mud 4,000 years ago and lost for 2,500 years and then dug up. Amazing.
We call it the Epic of Gilgamesh. Like the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian Creation Epic, which is more properly or more historically known by its opening words. So is Gilgamesh, Sanagbi Imuru, which means he who saw everything.
Yeah, so this is interesting. Apparently, a lot of these old Babylonian stories would either start when something, or would start basically let me tell you the story of. And this first line of that we've got of the Tsuneki.
It can be translated in various ways.
Yeah, but it's a tantalising echo. Again, going back to Martin West, because it's basically he who knew all things and travelled far. Right, let me tell you the story of him, and that is very, very close to the opening line of Homer's Odyssey.
Yeah.
Seeing about the clever hero who
widely travelled. Travelled far.
Travelled to many countries.
Do you think is that just a literary motif that is passed down for over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, or like that? This is how you begin books, like Once Upon a Time, or a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Right.
Or do you think there's a more conscious echo? I mean, we're not suggesting that.
Quite possibly.
I mean, did the Epic of Gilgamesh? Do we think does it still exist by the time that Homer was writing?
I think it definitely does. Yeah, because it still exists all the way to the destruction of Nineveh, and indeed there are echoes of it in stories of. I think it's called Gilgamesh. It changes a bit, but in Sinbad and the 1001 Nights. So I think in oral storytelling culture, great stories survive and are retold, and versions of them creep.
But they
into
seem
things.
like they belong to different worlds, don't they? And we're going to get on and talk next week about the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Yes, yeah, I think that's fair.
But I think maybe because that's a Greek text which comes from our civilization.
It seems much more familiar. Once you're talking about someone like even the gods, you're talking about Zeus. Suddenly it feels more. Whereas you talk about Tiamat, there's a kind of
they're monsters rather. We'll see quite a lot, I think, over this first series. The disappearance of the monsters. A lot of monsters in our early episodes. By later episodes, have all gone. That seems to be a sort of growing up of humanity.
Right.
Literature becomes more focused on us as people rather than as fate. Something with the fate of the gods, as playthings of the gods.
I see.
I think if you look at the early texts, we
yeah.
are apart from great kings and heroes. Individuals
a divine barmaid.
Well, that's the thing. If their wife is a barmaid, then really Enkidu is the only other major character in this. She's not an immortal or a god, and of course there are none such humans in Enuma Elish. I struggle because of the depth of time to think that the later texts are consciously riffing on this, but I think this is laying the foundations for how storytelling works. This is the proto book.
Yeah, it's the
proto story.
The story.
The story. I was going to make that joke, but I chose not to, and I think that would have been better for us all.
I think you're probably right, but it is a cracker, isn't it? And it's quite short. It's an easy read, and I would strongly recommend it.
Yes, it's longer than the Enuma Elish. Yeah, but it's not a 20-minute, but it's
you can read it in an hour.
Probably.
Yeah. Oh, and it is a cracker.
It's a novella.
I think it's a novella, and I think we will put it forward. I'm very happy to put it forward for the ultimate.
It's got sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Drugs, if you count the plant.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, there's a lot of sex.
Yeah.
I mean, the sex is interesting, isn't it? I like the idea of the goddess of sex fucking you to death. That is a I don't know. It's an interesting trope.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why that interests you. You've been married a long time, haven't you? It's probably wistful remembrances.
Yeah, and it's been a while. Having small kids is a bit of a dampener in the old passions.
There is something just amusing about the idea of that wild hedonistic sex is not a thing which is something of abandonment, but in fact the way by which you get civilised.
Yes,
that's just where you suddenly need to sort yourself out. Yeah. You don't see on the NHS going bipolar. Yeah. CBT or
you need the love of a good
prostitution
woman, or love of a bad woman, preferably.
It is strange to imagine if we lived in a world in which Judeo-Christianity hadn't conquered, or the Abrahamic religions, and whether we still had paganism. Would we have kept the same sexual mores, or would they themselves have disappeared and become a slightly sort of more moralistic, like paganism or Mithras or something. But
Yeah.
or would we have just gone, actually,
Happy
sex,
days.
sex is part of religion?
Yeah. That's a fascinating question.
Yeah. Please write in.
Please write in.
The alewife answered, Gilgamesh, where are you hurrying to? You will never find that life for which you're looking. When the gods created man, they allotted to him death, but life they retained in their own keeping. As for you, Gilgamesh, fill your belly with good things. Day and night and day, dance and be merry, feast and rejoice. Let your clothes be fresh, bathe yourself in water, cherish the little child that holds your hand, and make your wife happy in your embrace. For this, too, is the lot of man.
That is the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I strongly commend it.
So, are we about to then decide between Enuma Elish and the Epic of Gilgamesh?
No, because...
Only one can survive?
Only one can go through. I am going to throw in, though, a wild card. And this is something that we've talked about, that sometimes 2 books is not enough in this Battle of the Books. Let's chuck in a wild card and see what...
I was originally against the wildcard thing, only because it essentially means reading 300 books rather than 200 books.
Yes, I see that.
But I think we're not going to always do it. But I think
wait and see wait and see what you think of this. So we've been talking about Mesopotamian literature from the Dead Library, the King of the World. But of course, there was another civilization in the neighbourhood. Ashurbanipal indeed had conquered it, and it's very familiar. The civilization of ancient Egypt, and sure enough there is ancient Egyptian literature as well. There's not very much of it survives. We know that from catalogues that have survived, that there's a lot that's missing, which is tantalising. And indeed I once went to a party in Cairo where I met a very impressive, I guess you could say she was like an intellectual, an Egyptian intellectual, who explained this to me. And I was saying, I was talking about Gilgamesh, but saying how impressed I was by the ancient Egyptian pyramids. Are absolutely amazing. If you ever get a chance to see them, they really are mind-blowing. But, where's the literature? Where's the Gilgamesh? And she said, there's a very obvious reason for that, which is that they built in mud and all of their buildings washed away, but they wrote on mud and that survived, whereas we built in stone, we got the pyramids and everything, but we wrote on paper and that didn't survive, so we just don't have it. So it doesn't mean we didn't...
So you think that there are Egyptian Gilgamesh's great works of literature?
Quite possibly.
But just gone.
But we've lost them. Now, that said, we did find some tantalising fragments in a tomb, a small tomb, a mastaba is the technical name for it.
Say that again?
A mastaba of it was a book lover, basically, a scribe in ancient Egypt, and he had collected, he'd be buried with his books, which I think is quite a nice, I wouldn't mind that.
Lucky for us that Ashurbanipal wasn't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as a result, we've got some tantalising stories from ancient Egypt. We've got, lots of people have heard of the Book of the Dead, which is kind of religious work. A lot of this stuff is focused on the afterlife, and it's kind of religious.
Well, the Egyptians were really they were fascinated by the afterlife.
They absolutely were, yeah. And I mean that is a massive theme that runs through all of these stories. But there are other themes as well, with some tantalising echoes, I think, of the same kind of ideas that are being explored in Gilgamesh. There's themes of homosexuality, or at least bromance, which is interesting because that is not something that is acceptable in Egyptian society according to official inscriptions and funeral notes. But it seems to play quite a large role in some of these writings, which is a scribe class writing for itself, I guess. Lots of questions you say about mortality and the afterlife, real and mythic journeys. There is one story in particular, which I think we have several versions of actually. The story of Sinuhe. He was a nanny. He was basically he was the nanny, or the manny, I guess, of Pharaoh's kids.
Now, I suspect it's probably worth pointing out now, because our fellow listeners, or our listeners here, rather, our fellow travellers, are going to be with us for a while, we hope. You have a bit of a thing about nannies, don't you? And every time you mention that, I saw the glint in your eye as you said it, and I just feel that there'll be a suspicious number of nannies in the thing.
I've got 2 nannies at the moment. Yeah. I mean, I've got my kids. We've got 2 nannies. We've got 2 nannies.
Does your wife?
Take that, Rees-Mogg.
Yeah. Does your wife know about your nanny thing? Did you tell her?
My wife met my nanny. I still had my nanny when I was going out with my now wife.
You were 20.
I was 17.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it because your mother never?
Good old nanny.
Suckled you.
My nanny didn't suckle me either, sadly, but
she wasn't wet.
She did bathe me. She bathed me until I was 14.
So many things wrong.
Nothing wrong about that.
Are you bathed now by your children's nanny?
No.
Are you intending to employ
them
until your son is 14?
Well, I don't see why not. It's a natural way of things, isn't it?
I just want to point out that I didn't have a nanny. I mean, we actually had a sort of childminder who looked after us at the end of school. We didn't.
That's what a nanny means.
Yeah, so we did have a nanny, but she didn't live. She wasn't live in on anything. You know.
I see. Yeah.
And my parents both worked, you know, and therefore it made sense to have someone to look after. But Mrs. Evans never bathed or suckled.
Mrs. Evans, if you're listening.
I think Mrs. Evans has subsequently gone to the afterlife with the pharaohs.
Right, okay.
She also did not stay awake for 3 days and learn the secret of immortality.
Did it say on her Masturbatoon she neither bathed nor suckled? But she came with excellent references.
But she was not.
It's like Mary Poppins.
I mean, she was lovely in many ways, but she would not be a person who would form the origin of a long-standing, deeply psychosexual. Anyway, back to your masturber.
My Masturbatoon. So, how did we get onto this? Sinuhe. Yes, so he's the nanny. He's the pharaonic nanny, okay, of the Emperor Amenemhat.
Yeah.
The first, who was...
I'm glad you clarified that, because the Amenemhats, so easy
there
to
were
get
quite a few of
confused,
them, to be fair, but he was the first pharaoh of the Middle Kingdom. So basically you had the Old Kingdom, which is the sort of between 3000 and 2000, they were the pyramid builders. Then you had like a Dark Age, intermediate period, they call it in Egypt. And then this guy, Amenemhat, put it all back together again, kicked ass, was then killed, he was assassinated, and at the moment he's assassinated, that's when this story is set. But we think he really was assassinated. We've got other texts that seem to confirm that. But his son, the Greeks called Sesostris, I can't remember his Egyptian name, takes over. But the son's nanny, Sinuhe, basically runs like the bloody hell away. He thinks, oh my god, they're going to come for us all, or something, or there's a hint maybe he's in on the coup, or he knows about it, hasn't warned someone, or it's ambiguous. It's quite interesting.
His employment situation has changed.
Absolutely. And you don't forget about the references. He is off. Right, just like Mary Poppins, in that heartbreaking scene at the end of Mary Poppins.
I understand that recently she has returned, but I've not seen that either.
And Mary Poppins 2, yeah, I mean, it's not as great as the original, I think you could safely say.
Okay. And presumably, the original is on repeat at your house.
It is, yeah. Yeah, the uncut version. X-rated. He flees the country, and he goes to, interestingly, he basically goes to Lebanon, which is, obviously where some of the Gilgamesh story is set. And he basically sets up as a kind of local ruler there. He has a series of adventures. Kicks a lot of ass. He becomes quite an important bloke, and he kind of takes over in this little kingdom over there. But eventually he gets old, and he's starting to face his own mortality, and he wants to be buried back in Egypt. And the guy whose nanny he was, who's now the pharaoh, says, "Come, you can come back. It's fine. No hard feelings. Come back, and we will let you die here, and you can have a little pyramid of your own, a little Masturbatoon of your own. Is every Egyptian stream, and that's what happens." And he goes and he.
It's like the equivalent of picket fences, isn't it?
Yeah.
Little nice lawn, little Masturbatoon.
Yeah.
We're talking about stepped pyramids, aren't we?
Yeah, I believe so. And they're sort of mini pyramids.
Mini pyramids, but not in a flat sides.
I think that's right.
More like a sort of Inca thing.
Yeah,
it's a great story, isn't it?
Do you know who built the first step pyramid?
I don't.
Imhotep.
Oh.
Imhotep was he wasn't a pharaoh. He was like the pharaoh's builder.
The architect. He's the guy who later becomes the mummy in the in the mummy.
That's his. Yeah. It's literally him.
Oh,
that's great. Great film. The Bainbridge Scholar.
I mean, if you're talking about yeah.
That's good. I mean, that is good. Good films, those. Particularly the first one.
The second one's all right. I'm not sure about the Scorpion.
The Scorpion King. I think that's the best of the whole franchise. That is fantastic. But it doesn't have
Rachel Weisz in it. She's not in it. She's in the first.
That's true. But it does have Imhotep, and it's highly historically accurate. I understand. They really went back to the source
material. Would you recommend it as a shortcut? As if you don't want to read Sinuhe's the story of Sinuhe, just
watch those films. Definitely for Rachel Weisz, if nothing else. I mean, there is actually a surviving sort of dialogue between Imhotep and Cheops, the guy who's buried. So, I mean, it could be a shortcut for that.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, yeah, I mean, I would not put this in the same...
It doesn't sound like it's...
Gilgamesh.
I mean, it's a good story, and great to know the Egyptians wrote them.
Yeah,
but,
it's
by default we're giving this one. You're not convincing me yet.
Well, okay, let me raise you another one. So there's also, and I think it was in the same kind of library, the buried library, there is the story of two brothers, right? Bata and Anpu, and basically the missus of one of these brothers fancies the other brother.
Oh,
And
it's
by
a
that,
classic tale.
Right, so they fall out and he rejects her advances, to be fair, but she's so sort of slighted by this that she basically pretends that he had seduced her and sets the brothers against each other. And
Again, you get an echo with the Joseph story, again in Egypt.
It's a very old one, this.
Yeah.
And yes, it's set in Egypt, so it may well be a kind of
Potiphar.
echo. That's right. But I don't remember this bit from the Bible, so...
Not even from the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Not even from that, another shortcut. If you want it.
Can't be bothered to read Genesis, yeah.
Yeah, so they have a fight, the gods create a crocodile-infested lake to separate them, and then they shout at each other across the lake, and the innocent one, to prove he's innocent, as far as I can see, he cuts off his own ghoulies, chucks them in the lake, where they're gobbled up by a giant catfish.
I mean, I hate it when that happens, but it is a recognised way of resolving conflict.
Oh, definitely.
But
and there's also there's also a beer element to the story. The Egyptians are another warm beer civilization, I'm pleased to say, with straws, absolutely. And basically, at the end, the brother who's castrated himself, he basically makes a sort of prediction of the future, and he says, "Come and seek me out for help. If your beer ever froths over, that will be the sign that." I mean, it is terrible when you look like you're slightly suffering from the.
I just know. I've never been believed that a pint should come with a reasonable head. It's always just a lack of beer.
No, but it's only you wanted to go to Germany, you get like a litre, and okay, half of it's bubbles, but
it's like when you order like a soft drink at a bar, and they go, "Do you want ice with that?" Obviously not. I want a pint of the liquid, not half of it.
What you say is, yes, but I want the ice in a separate glass.
Yeah.
And then you get the rest of both bottles. Ha! They haven't thought of that, have they?
Frothy beer for me. No, I want a meniscus.
I want a big head on the beer. Yeah. But so, there's a friend of mine, quite a clever chap, but he's deeply, deeply stupid in some respects. And I've known him for 20 years. Whenever we go out to the pub, he always orders a lager, and then he always doesn't drink it. And I say, why are you drinking that? He says, it's a bit gassy. This is a bit of a gassy beer. And that has happened consistently every single time I've been out with him. And it's like, I wanted to know, mate, it's supposed to be gassy. That's the whole point.
Lager is gassy.
Yeah.
It's rancid.
Oh, well, you drink ale like the Babylonians.
Yeah.
Gilgamesh's favourite.
There's a space for a lager occasionally on a
very hot day.
Yeah.
Well, but it would have been hot, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
That's the thing. Got your IPA or whatever. Is that going to be nice when you're building a pyramid?
I've just moved on to something called Lucky Saint.
Yep. This is a bit fizzy in this.
This is a
I
bit
tell you what, the straws are. It's challenging drinking beers through a straw, isn't it?
There's going to be some gassiness going. Yeah, absolutely.
So we're talking about pyramids, right?
Yeah, whenever we can.
I met someone. This is an absolutely true story. I met someone who had sex in the Great Pyramid of Cheops.
That's fantastic. Because most of it is solid, as far as we know.
But he was in the actual burial chamber, in the sarcophagus.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So he bribed the guards. This was about 20 years ago, I think. He basically bribed the guards, took this girl in with him. They did the business in the sarcophagus of Cheops in the middle of the pyramid.
It's just stony, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, it would be uncomfortable, I would have thought.
I think that's it.
I think that'd be the least of your worries. Obviously...
What about American tourists coming through?
I've seen this happen after hours, overnight. But no, but that makes it spookier, doesn't it? I mean, obviously there's curses on this, do not disturb this tomb. Definitely don't have sex in it.
Oh, I mean, that's not clear. It's not explicit.
I think it's heavily implicit. And would you want to take the risk? I mean, you don't want bloody Imhotep turning up, all covered in bog roll, coming at you while you're at it.
It wouldn't be what I was mainly worried.
If you think about the horror films of the mummies, those are the characters that are going to be the first to go, aren't they? The ones that thought, it'd be great idea to have sex in the tomb.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a horror trope, isn't it? That the woman's fine until she's not a virgin anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So, it was like Enkidu.
Yeah. He would have been. Were you saying he would have survived were it not for Gilgamesh's taming him?
Yeah, he'd have just been romping around with the animals out in the woods.
Yeah. So
there it is. So we've got these Egyptian stories. Like I say, I mean, it is a really wild card because I just don't think they stand up really against the epicness of Gilgamesh.
Yeah, we're already having to divide between the earliest work of creation mythology and the first book. So I mean, the story of the little ending with the little pyramid of his own and the
it's quite sweet.
It's sweet.
It's a short story,
and like the other one,
it's of interest. Is it one of the greatest 100 books of all time?
No. Okay.
Whatever god fated this flight, be gracious and bring me home. Surely you will let me see the place where my heart still stays. What matters more than my being buried in the land where I was born? This is my prayer for help.
Well, thanks for wasting my time.
There is a shortcut for it, though.
Yeah, but let's say we were not recommending that to our listeners. but they wanted to get it. Well, what's this shortcut? What they want to understand?
Well, there is a film version of it with Peter Ustinov, bizarrely. It's called The Egyptian, and it is absolutely terrible.
Right.
So, I mean, just read the story is like 10 pages long in translation. So.
And you can watch the 2-hour-long adaptation.
Yeah.
Well, I won't be doing that.
No, I wouldn't recommend it. Other shortcuts we've talked about, the mummy. Oh, there's a painting. Can you have a painting shortcut? Delacroix, The Death of Sardanapalus, which is Ashurbanipal. And there he is on his bed, the famous painting. He's got all of his women around him. They're sort of killing themselves, naked women draped over him, piles of gold, flames in the background. It's absolutely fantastic.
Sounds fantastic.
That's about it really for the shortcuts, but you don't really need shortcuts for these because they're so short.
No,
themselves,
so
right?
we should indicate what we mean by shortcuts is we are going to be recommending to people as we go through that if you're interested by some of the stuff we've been talking about, but you just genuinely don't have the time to read anything other than at least the one book that wins, we'd like to hope that you would go through, but even that perhaps not. If there has been a sort of film or a play or an audio drama or something like that, we'll recommend it.
Yes, absolutely.
And whether it's any good and whether it's actually good enough to have just done that instead.
Yeah, and I think that there's a case in some cases that it will be. In some cases it might even be better than the original. I don't think there's any shame in that, people are busy.
But these really early ones, no one has done the Enuma Elish, the Epic of Gilgamesh, or any of these. Gilgamesh, I just don't understand. I mean, you could argue that they have done the Enuma Elish because, of course, they've taken aspects of that, and not really. But I mean, I suppose you could argue that the Pishton has been done as many times.
Russell Crowe.
But no, generally, this first episode is a bit of an exception because these ancient stories have not been filmed. And certainly with Gilgamesh, I don't understand why. You could easily do a good adaptation.
Yeah, absolutely. You could either do it as a sort of action thing, or you could do like a Pasolini kind of art house version. I think they should do both. I don't know why it hasn't been done.
So, we need to pick one.
We need to pick one.
Yeah.
Only one can go through at the back of the books.
So to be fair, I've said how great Epic of Gilgamesh is as a modern classic and stuff. But the Enuma Elish is game-changing and it's like it's not only really important in terms of the history of ideas, but it has changed our understanding of a book which we're not allowed to talk about because it is the religious text of a currently existing religion. But it had such a significant impact on the modern world. I would argue, strangely, if the Epic of Gilgamesh was wiped out from human knowledge, controversial it is, it wouldn't actually change that much.
And indeed, it was wiped out for 2.5 millennia, and no one knew about it.
No one knew about the Babylonian Creation Epic.
How would you unpick that from our culture?
How would you unpick that from our culture now?
Right, well, let me just stop you there because, news just in, I'm afraid to say we set our rule, which is you cannot have any religious works from existing religions, but get this, in Iceland, apparently, there are some people who still worship the Babylonian pantheon.
That sounds highly implausible.
Well, no, so I think my understanding is, and if any of them are listening, please don't take this wrong way. I don't want to be, sacrificed to Marduk, the double-headed. I think there are tax breaks available for religions in Iceland. So I draw no link between that and the fact that, but there are apparently, there's a worshipping community of Babylonian pantheists in Iceland, more than several hundred of them. So I'm afraid I think that means that we can't have the Enuma Elish.
So just let me make this clear. In our conceit of this Battle of the Books, we are saying that we are trying to pick the 100 greatest works of literature, not only the ones which people should read, but essentially were the world to end,
you had to
save, and the rest of them should be in some senses considered burnt and destroyed for all intents and purposes. And therefore, in order to avoid offending the religious sensibility of modern-day Icelanders, we must in fact burn their book.
Yes, I think that is what we're saying.
Or are we perhaps suggesting that religious texts belonging to currently existing religions will be saved by someone?
I think they're in a different.
They're in a different.
They're in different. They survive separately. So I think you get it. So it will survive separately. So but you don't need it in your ultimate library.
Well, okay. Well, with that caveat.
So in that case, can I make the case it's got to be Gilgamesh? Of course, it has to be Gilgamesh.
I think you could have potentially convinced me of that anyway. I would just the point about the impact of the Enuma Elish was one I think definitely worth considering as a curveball, but Epic of Gilgamesh is one that I recommend that people go away and read now.
Absolutely.
Whereas, to be honest, I think you've learned everything you need to know about the Enuma Elish from our description.
Yeah. And your brilliant description of Tiamat and the strategic deployment of wind.
Yeah, I mean, monsters and wind. That's what we've been covering this week. Tune in again for more of the same, but actually no, completely different is the same. But Okay, let's face it. Book number 1.
Yeah.
One of the greatest books of all time. The Epic of
The
Gilgamesh.
Epic of Gilgamesh. We've got one in the bag, and thank you very much. And now, I will say, let us ask, our listeners will be interested to know what you think, and we're going to be doing a little quiz each podcast, so you can vote yourselves. We'll be interested to see what other people think. If you have to, if you have the time and inclination to read both.
Well, you have got the time definitely this week. I mean, there might be occasional.
It will not take you long.
But you could easily have a look at it. You could probably buy them. I'm not sure if you can buy them in a collected book.
Oh, I think you can actually. Yeah.
Very earliest stuff.
Right.
But these books, I mean, these are not some random things that we've discovered in libraries and universities. We might have just talk about the dead library of the King of the World.
But now all good bookshops.
Yeah, go buy some Waterstones. So, yeah.
So there it is. We have our first winner to go through to our own dead library, which can be rediscovered hopefully on the day that the thirst for beer drives mankind to resurrect civilization from the ashes.
Oh, cheers to that.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And we can give you a literal breakfast of champions.
Yeah, what carbonara and Beamish.
And a small steak.
Yeah.